Hi, and welcome to another episode of Joy Recovery Radio. Glad that you've joined us today. We're actually going to start a three-part series on intimacy. Today's episode is going to be about self-intimacy. The second episode in the series will be about how to do check-ins in a way that builds emotional intimacy with your partner. And then the third episode is about a tool that you can use to further develop your emotional intimacy when you're going to talk about difficult conversations, and that is the imago dialogue. So today we're going to focus on self-intimacy. We want to begin with a reminder of the framework that we use when we look at sex addiction and sexual integrity issues. At the very core of this addictive system is shame. And shame is the driver and the influencer and center of this operating system, of this way of believing and thinking and living. And shame influences and drives and impacts all the other elements. There's four primary elements that are part of this shame system, and they're represented by the A, B, C, D. A is the addictive behavior or the acting out. B is the bitterness or the resentment that often comes with shame. C is the control or the abusive behavior towards the partner. And D represents the distorted beliefs that are part of this shame system. And together they make up this shame-based system. There are four other secondary elements that we won't get into today, but what we want to move from is shame and into intimacy. It's been said that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is intimacy. And we want to talk about intimacy today. Now, many of us that have had sexual integrity issues and compulsive deceptive sexuality in our past, we are not familiar with intimacy. We pursued false intimacy with our addictive behavior. And so intimacy is not a familiar concept for us, but it's something that we need to exercise and experience and practice and lean into because it is a new skill. It's a new muscle for us to use. In fact, some of us actually thought that the word intimacy was just a substitute word for sex, that they meant the same thing, that intimacy was the word you might use if kids were around and you didn't want to say sex. So you might say intimacy or intimate, when actually there are multiple levels and dimensions of intimacy, and sex is just one of them. But one of the deepest levels and dimensions of intimacy is emotional intimacy. When we describe intimacy, we're just going to go ahead and use the all too familiar adage. And that is, when we talk about intimacy, we're talking about into me, see, that there is a level of vulnerability. There's a level of transparency. Going back to our origin, Adam and Eve in the garden, they were, quote, naked and unashamed. That is, they were transparent. There was nothing to hide. There was no covering. There was no hidden aspects of who they were. They were fully known, fully accepted, fully loved, and fully embraced. And they had that same intimate relationship with their creator. That's what we long to get back to. And that is intimacy. And we want to have emotional intimacy with our partners. But in order to do that, there is something that is a prerequisite. And that is what we're going to call self-intimacy. And what we mean by self-intimacy is that this is, in the psychological literature, sometimes this is referred to as self-attunement or self-awareness. It's being intimate with yourself. It's knowing yourself. It's being introspective and reflective and looking at the layers of who you are. And we're going to talk about some ways to do that today. But most of us addicts do not have or practice self-intimacy. And what we want to experience is what the prodigal son experienced in that parable. And that is when he reached rock bottom and he's in that pig pen and he is destitute and lonely in a foreign country, penniless and hungry. Even the slop of the food of the pigs looked appetizing to him. The story says that he came to his senses, or he came to himself. He became self-aware of what was going on and what he needed to do. That's what we want. We want to be connected and attuned to ourselves. In order for this to happen, there's actually three different dimensions or domains of intimacy that we want to pursue. And we want to pursue them in this particular order. And that is God, self, and others. We want an intimate connection with our higher power. From that connection, he illuminates who we are. He shines his spotlight into the cracks and crevices and corners of our heart, because our heart is deceitful. We, especially as addicts, in a lot of ways, we lived self-deceived. And so we can't just rely upon our intuition and our own insight. We need God to illuminate who we really are. And so the closer we get to our higher power, the more aware we become of who we are. Why? Because he's our creator. He was intimately knitting us and forming us in our mother's womb. He made our personality and our skills and our talents and our proclivities and everything that makes us who we are unique and carefully designed by him. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And that kind of intimacy where we experience intimacy with God and intimacy with self is what's called communion. And that's where self-awareness actually begins. The closer we are to our higher power, the more self-aware we become, because he shows us who we really are. He breaks through the denial, he breaks through the self-deception, and he illuminates the aspects of our heart and our motives and our intentions and the flaws inside and who we really are. And so God is always working in us, through us, and around us. And we want to be conscious of that. We want to be aware of that. And so when we practice spiritual disciplines like meditation or prayer or reading scripture or spending time in nature or journaling, what we're doing is we are practicing that intimacy with our Creator and with ourself, and we're becoming more attuned to who we are. And he shows us who we really are. And the overflow of that communion with God, intimacy with God and self, the overflow of that is intimacy with others. The more intimate we are with God and ourself, the more capacity we have to be intimate with others. And this is what I mean by that. For example, one of the best things you can do that we're going to talk about in the next episode of this series is daily check-ins with your partner. That is an invitation to emotional intimacy, and that is a very vulnerable thing. But you are limited in your capacity to be emotionally intimate with your partner by how self-aware you are. How can you disclose how you're feeling or what your needs are or what your struggles are if you're not attuned to yourself? So intimacy begins with God, self, and then others. Intimacy with others is what we call community. Intimacy with God and self is what we call communion. The more we have communion with our Creator, the more capacity we have to have community with others. And when I say connection or intimacy with others, that does include our partner, but it's not limited to that. We're talking about our brotherhood or our sisterhood or our family. Our emotional capacity to be intimate to others around us is predicated by our capacity of being intimate with God and self. And so that's the flow and that's the rhythm and that's the order that intimacy needs to go in. Here's the problem. Especially when we face challenges in our life, we usually distort that order and we rely upon self first, quite often. Then we might rely on others. And then perhaps as a very last resort, we connect with God. We may, as a last resort, offer a Hail Mary prayer. We've tried everything else. Let's try God. When actually we want to go in the order of God, connecting with him and allowing him to meet our needs. And some of our needs only our Creator can meet. Some of our needs we can meet ourselves by challenging our self-talk, by journaling, by replacing distorted beliefs with healthy beliefs. Some of our needs we can, in our relationship with ourselves, we can meet those needs. And then some of our needs are going to be primarily met through attachment to others. But it needs to go in that order, and that's the flow of intimacy. Now, let me give you a tool that'll help you become more attuned to who you really are. And I get this from a passage in Scripture that's called in Hebrew, the Shema. And it's also known as the Great Commandment from God. And it simply says something like this. We are to love God with everything that we are, with all of our being. And it talks about 4 dimensions of who we are. It says we're to love God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength. So 4 different dimensions of our personhood. An easy way to remember that is the acronym BEST, B-E-S-T. Those are the 4 dimensions of who you are. And the more attuned you are to these 4 elements, the more self-aware and self-intimate you can become. The BEST stands for B, body, E, emotions, S, your spirit, and T, your thoughts. And so these are the 4 domains of who we are. And the more in touch we are with what's going on inside each of these domains, the more self-aware we are. And the more capacity we have to be intimate with others because we know ourselves and we can disclose ourselves and we can be fully known and we can be transparent and we can take that risk of emotional intimacy. So let's take an example. Let's say that today you're wanting to be the BEST, the best version of yourself. And if you want to be the best version of yourself, you need to be attuned to BEST, to best. And so you do a reflection and perhaps you're journaling or you're just looking inside to see how's my body, my emotions, my spirit, and my thoughts today. What's going on inside of me? So that and I check in with my partner or when I call a brother today or call a sister today or whatever, and I'm wanting to have an intimate connection with them, I'm able to talk about what's going on inside of me today. So let's take B, body. Let's just go in order. Perhaps today I'm sleep deprived. I'm fatigued. My body is at about 30%. the battery is low. And I'm realizing that. And it's affecting the other three domains. It's affecting my emotions, my spirit, my thoughts, because my body is just depleted and tired. I've gone 3 nights without adequate sleep, and I'm just starting to feel the impact of that. That is good information to know about yourself. Or let's look at E, emotions. Perhaps as you look at your current state, you realize that one of the 3 I's of shame has come up for you. Just as a reminder, the 3 I's of shame that we talk about. The first one is insignificance, feeling like I'm not worthy, I'm not valuable. The second I is feeling like I can't do anything right, I'm a failure. And then third I is impotence, and that is I powerless, hopeless, helpless, nothing will ever change, I'm not enough, I can't affect change. Those are the 3 I's of shame. And sometimes when we look at our emotions, we realize some of those have come up for us. And usually when one of the 3 I's of shame show up for us, there is some kind of relational need, attachment need that we need to address in order to process and let go of that shame. And we're going to come back to that. So let's say we're looking introspectively at our emotions and we realize maybe not one of the 3 I's has showed up, but a very unpleasant emotion is feeling stuck inside of us and it's creating tension for us. We've looked at body, we've looked at emotions. Let's look at the S, spirit. When I talk about spirit, I'm talking about that part of us that's able to commune with God. God is spirit, and he breathed his spirit into us when he created us. And we have this unique capacity to have this connection with our creator. And that's the part of us that sometimes when we take a look inside of our spirit, we realize there's this dissonance, there's this tension, there's this existential angst inside of us. And sometimes it's because we have violated our conscience in some way. We've done something that is against our values. Perhaps we're holding on to a secret, and that's creating this angst inside of us where we know we need to admit this. We need to confess this to our partner and perhaps to a brother and to our creator. And we're just holding on to it. And it's creating this tension inside of us that's affecting body, emotion, and thoughts. And so I hope you begin to see how all of these domains of our personhood are interrelated and they impact one another. Or let's say we look at our thoughts. When we look at our thoughts, perhaps we realize that we've gone into victim mode, that we're seeing our partner or someone else or our boss or anybody, family member, we're seeing them as the villain and we're feeling like the victim and we're having this preoccupation with those thoughts and we're ruminating on it. Or perhaps when we look at our thoughts, we realize that we're holding on to resentment towards someone. Or perhaps we recognize some distorted beliefs or some relational rules that we have that are unconscious and implicit, but our awareness has been raised about it. And now it's come to our attention that we're thinking these distorted thoughts. Or perhaps if you're like me, when I go into stinking thinking, when I'm not thinking in a healthy way, when I'm off in some way, I'm more prone towards pessimism and I'm more prone to see the glass as half empty, not half full, and have more negative perspective on things. So this is an example of tuning into yourself, taking a look inside, asking God to illuminate what's going on in my body, my emotions, my spirit, and my thoughts. And as you do this, what's typically going to come up is some kind of relational need, or some call it an attachment. And these are valid needs. These are needs that are typically only met through a relationship. That's why I call them relational needs. And the order we want to go in to meet those needs is God, self, others. That's the order. And so there are 17 different relational core needs that I'm going to put in the show notes. For those of you who are listening, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see it on your screen. But there are 17 core relational needs that may show up as we look at our BEST, at our best inventory, and we want to be the best version of ourselves. In order to do that, we need to take action on whatever shows up for us. And so here's the problem from our past. We had legitimate relational needs in the past when we were in our active addiction, but we didn't pursue those needs and meet those needs in a healthy, intimate way. Instead, there were 3 different paths of destruction that we typically would follow. With our needs, what we would do is we would either act in, and what I mean by that is avoid intimacy, not meet our needs. We would just keep everyone at a distance. So we'd either act in, or we'd medicate, or we'd act out. So acting in is intimacy avoidance. It's suppressing our needs. Medicating is self-soothing and medicating our needs. And this can be done through a host of different ways, whether it's food or drink or substance or shopping or becoming a gymaholic or social media, disassociation, just constantly scrolling and medicating yourself, or hours and hours of video games, or a lot of different behaviors that we can use to medicate ourselves when we have a need show up and we don't pursue it through an intimate relationship with God, self, or others. And then acting out, that was a form of trying to meet legitimate needs in an illegitimate way through false intimacy that wasn't real and never satisfied and did not meet our core relational needs. So those were all cycles of destruction. And every time a need shows up for us, we have a choice. Do we go down the path of destruction, or we go down the path of intimacy? Going down the path of intimacy is recognizing what our needs are when we do our best inventory, and then reaching out to some type of attachment or relationship to see if we can get those needs met in the order of God, self, and others. And so that's the path of intimacy. And if we realize that, what I'm needing this moment is I'm needing to feel forgiven, we can go to God for that and confess whatever it is that is in our spirit that's causing this disruption for us. We can also practice forgiveness towards ourselves. Or we may want to call our brother or have a moment with our partner and confess what's going on inside of us and have this feeling of forgiveness and cleansing. Or perhaps we realize what I need right now is just to be validated. I need someone to just listen without judgment. They don't need to fix it. I just need to feel heard and seen and understood and validated. And so we might journal, we might pray, or we may call a brother that we trust, that we know is a good friend and will listen and validate us. These are paths of intimacy. These are healthy ways to meet valid needs instead of going towards the path of destruction by acting in, medicating, or acting out. But there is another dynamic that may happen from time to time, and that is we don't escape through the cycles of destruction. We don't act in, medicate, or act out. And so we don't choose that path. We choose the virtuous path of integrity by pursuing intimacy to meet our valid relational needs. But sometimes those needs don't get met. That happens. Sometimes we pray to God, sometimes we journal, sometimes we reflect and meditate, and sometimes we call our brother and we don't get our needs met. What do you do with that? What happens in that dynamic is that you still don't want to escape. You still don't want to go towards a cycle of destruction. But what sometimes happens for all of us is that what God wants us to do is sit in that pain of this unmet need, because that's when he builds our character. That's when he builds patience, self-control, perseverance. And he rewards us for not going down those destructive paths of the past like we used to. And we try to pursue intimacy. And sometimes he wants to forge integrity and build our character through the crucible of an unmet need. And that we just need to sit in it and we just need to feel it, knowing that it will pass, but trust that our higher power is developing something in us through this experience. And that's going to be a dynamic that's going to happen from time to time. So one final thing that I want to point out is that when I say God, self, and others, I want you to understand that others does include your partner, but not exclusively your partner. And in early recovery, she may not have the capacity, while she's still grieving and doing her own healing, for you to go to her for your relational needs and attachment needs. And that's why having a brotherhood is so critical. Because there are some things while she's going through her grieving process that you don't need to be putting on her. And so you go to your brotherhood for some of those emotional, relational needs that you have. And you're practicing intimacy so that when she does feel safe and she has a level of healing that she's ready to be emotionally intimate with you, and there's more equilibrium and stability and security in the relationship, you have been practicing intimacy. You have been building that muscle. You have been pursuing intimacy with God, self, and others so that when she's ready, you're ready. And so you don't press pause on pursuing intimacy because your partner's not ready to meet your needs or to have that level of transparency with you. She doesn't feel safe. You still need to be pursuing intimacy. That is the opposite of addiction. And that is the antidote for shame. We developed our shame through some type of attachment. We heal our shame through some type of attachment. We developed our shame because of some kind of message that was sent to us from some kind of attachment in our life, typically in our childhood. We heal that shame by a corrective experience and a corrective message from a healthy attachment in our life. And so we want to pursue intimacy. It is curative. It is healing. It is the path of getting out of that shame cycle and moving towards a life of intimacy. But there are moments and seasons where we don't need to go to our partner for that. And then the final thing that I want to conclude with as we wrap up this episode on self-intimacy is for you to understand that if you picture an escalator and the escalator is going down and you're trying to go up that escalator, that is what it's like to pursue intimacy. That every human being by nature is intimacy avoidant. We avoid people. We hide. We go into our own covering. We have our own sophisticated fig leaves that we hide behind. Every son of Adam and daughter of Eve avoids intimacy in some way. That is the gravitational pull of our nature. That's our default. And so when we pursue intimacy, it takes daily effort and intention and focus of pursuing intimacy with God, self, and others. It is going against the grain, against the flow. It is like walking up an escalator that is going down. What that means is this. What happens on that escalator if you just stand still and you do nothing? You don't stay stationary. You drift downward. And that's what happens if we're not pursuing intimacy with God, self, others. If we're not taking action daily to do that, then by our nature, by default, we're going to be drifting back towards avoiding intimacy and cycles of destruction. So pursuing intimacy is the true work of recovery, and we need to be doing it daily. And don't make the mistake of thinking that busyness is recovery. Sometimes I appreciate the zeal of my brothers in recovery, but sometimes we make these grandiose commitments and plans. I'm going to attend 5 meetings a day, and I'm going to call 10 brothers a day, and all of this busyness, thinking that if we're really, really, really busy, that is recovery. And when actually it's not about the quantity of work, it's about the quality of work. And perhaps what would be more impactful for your recovery is not to attend all of these meetings and make all of these phone calls, but there's no intimacy being developed. Maybe what's more is, instead of talking to 10 brothers a day, you talk to one today, but it is an intimate interaction. It is the pursuit of intimacy. So measure your recovery by, how am I doing in moving up that downward escalator of intimacy? How am I pursuing intimacy with God, self, and others? What are the disciplines that I'm following to develop this muscle that's atrophied because I've never had intimacy in my life? That is self-intimacy. So I appreciate you joining us today for this episode. Join us next time as we talk about how to rethink check-ins and how to do it in such a way that you take the self-intimacy that you're developing and now overflow into emotional intimacy with your partner. We'll see you next time. Thanks.